For those of you who this is your first one to attend, we do these once a month. We have a variety of topics that the professors speak on, and we hope that you'll attend several of them. I think the subject matter is important, and sometimes that's the first thing that attracts us to an event. But for those of you who are pretty sure that law school is what you want to do, getting exposure to different professors, even if the subject matter may not be one that's currently at the top of your list, is a really good way to start getting a feel for what your law school experience is going to be like. And because of that, we like to have one of our very best presenters as our leadoff batter for our discussion series, and we're very grateful to Professor Jensen for being willing to do this presentation today. I think when you're evaluating professors and law schools and some of the criteria that you might make judgments on, that there's three key criteria. One is how deep is their subject matter expertise, and you can gauge that in large part by the experience that they've had and the publications that they have. And I'm not going to take the time because our Professor Jensen is going to be a lot more interesting than I am, but he is widely published and he has a depth of experience that is just fascinating in the different ways that he has served, including being in Afghanistan and other fascinating places like that. He has had been a professor at Fordham University and was the Judge Advocate General's was with the Judge Advocate General's Legal Center, and very, very interesting background and brings this great depth of experience. Another factor that I think is important if you're evaluating the quality of legal professors is the relevance of what they're doing. And here again, Professor Jensen is working with cutting-edge issues. Most recently this summer, when there were the cyber attacks on the Office of Personnel Data, major media outlets in quoting experts and going to get expert opinions on, is this terrorism, is this cyber war, what is this? Professor Jensen's one of those kind of experts that the media looks to for an expert opinion, and he was quoted in a major article about that incident. So he has that kind of relevance and is working on those kinds of cutting edge issues. The final criteria from my perspective, and I think it's an important one in addition to the academic qualifications, is what kind of a mentor and a teacher is that professor. And I've been here at the law school for a year now, and I can say unequivocally that anytime we've asked Professor Jensen to help out with an individual student or a group event, he is more than willing to do that because he really cares about the students that he teaches and the students that come here to this law school. So with that introduction, I will turn the time over to Professor Jensen, and we'll look forward to his remarks.
Thank you very much. So if you come to BYU Law School, you're likely to see me in two main subject areas, maybe three. The first is criminal law. So criminal law is a first-year subject that we teach in the second semester of law school, and I teach criminal law. So that's the domestic law, U.S. criminal law stuff, murder, rape, robbery, arson, etc. That's pretty exciting stuff. A lot of fun, interesting cases, right? You always hear the gruesome and gory stories. So you're likely to interact with me then, and then as well, as Galen said, I teach international law and law of armed conflict and national security law and those kind of classes, because based on my experience doing international law with the United States government. So, having said that, let me just ask you guys a question. How many of you, and I promise I'm not recording this, so you're not going to be hauled before a judge or anything, how many of you sped on your way to class today, like in your car? Come on, be honest. Right, about half of you. How many of you?
The rest of them walked.
Or on their bike and violated some other law. How many of you in the last week have violated some traffic regulation? All right, so there's a couple of you who haven't. For those of you who have, why did you do it? I mean, did you not know it was against the law? So you raised your hand that you happened last week. Did you not know it was against the law?
No, I knew it was the law. I just was in a rush across the street, and there was no cop. So I did.
Okay, so if I'm getting you right, what you're saying is that you knowingly violated the law. You knew it was wrong. You chose to do it. And you do this routinely? You violate the law? Pretty much, huh? Okay. So what about you?
I actually forgot I did the same thing this morning.
So you're a today violator as well?
I did.
All right, so what, go ahead and confess. Tell us what you're violating.
Same thing, just the light turned, I knew nobody was coming, so I didn't want to wait for the light again, so I just crossed where I was.
So, I don't, what does that mean? Does that mean you guys just like don't care about the law?
Did we just assign different importance to laws? Some seem, it's a lot. I don't drive 20 over the speed limit, but I'll drive 5 over. So maybe it's just, because the cops aren't going to hold everybody when it goes 5, so.
So it's like that joke about the bear, right? If you're being chased by a bear, you don't need to outrun the bear, you just need to outrun the guy you're with so that the bear gets in first, right? So it's okay in your mind to violate the law by 5 miles an hour, but not 20. And the difference is not whether it's a violation of the law or not. The difference is whether you'll get caught and punished.
Yeah, this is clean.
Anybody else feel the same way? Have the same experience, same thought? So why do you violate the law?
I mean, in this situation, like, I think it's not necessarily that I'll get caught. It's like, regardless of whether I got caught or not, I wouldn't go 20 over because of the extent. So it's not just fear.
So you draw your arbitrary line at...
At the extent I'm comfortable with.
Okay.
And then also, like, the penalty for jaywalking. Like, if I'm late for class, I'm obviously going to decide what would I rather do. Would I rather keep this law and be late to class, or would I rather violate it and most likely have nothing happen to me? And so I'm just going to go with option B if it's that case. Or if I'm not in a rush, then I'll
So
stay.
what it sounds like you're saying, and the rest of you, if I'm getting it wrong, speak up. What it sounds like you're saying is that you do a risk analysis with law. You look at the law, you know what the law is, and then you decide, well, let's see, given the fact that I want to get there 5 minutes earlier, it's worth it to me to violate the law this time. What if the punishment for jaywalking was death? Would you have jaywalked this morning if the punishment for jaywalking was death? Why not? There might have been some policeman with, let's back up. Yesterday, you were contemplating jaywalking. You were walking with someone else, and that person started to jaywalk. And all of a sudden, some dude in a police uniform jumped out from behind the bush, grabbed that person who jaywalked, shot him in the head, drug his body over the ditch, and then went and hid behind the bush again. Now, how would that impact your decision as to whether or not to jaywalk? Jaywalk, right? I mean, if the penalty was high enough. So, is what you're telling me is law, and this whole law school thing that you're contemplating is really just a class in risk analysis. And that law on its own doesn't carry any intrinsic value in its own, but only to the extent that it is a risk analysis and you weigh it whether or not you want to do it and whether the risks are great enough to deter you. Is that where you're at with the law?
I'd say no, because there's things that, same thought process that have nothing to do with the law, that aren't illegal. So there are plenty of things that are legal that I don't do, and I contemplate them in a similar manner.
Why don't you do it?
Because, like I said...
And could I paint a scenario enough? Okay, are you married?
No.
Let's assume you are. You're married, your wife is about to have a baby, like seriously
Right
gonna
now.
have the baby. And are you then tempted to go 20 miles per hour on the speed limit?
Yeah.
So are there really rules you won't break?
Yeah. But I'm saying that they're not just laws. I mean, there can be things that are fully legal that I wouldn't break. So it's not just applying this to just the laws of the land, but I mean this to...
So maybe moral laws, for example, right?
Yeah, or also like personal integrity laws, like there's other things that nor church nor nation tell me, and
But you still have that as
but
your...
I wouldn't do anything about it.
All right, well, so, I mean, hopefully all of us have that, right? Hopefully all of us have those kinds of guiding principles. But for law to have some kind of, let's say that there's laws that don't agree with your guiding principles. For laws to have some kind of bite with you, what is it that makes them have it? What is it that makes that law suddenly impact you enough that you will abide by it?
Well, I think where you're going is penalties, right? I think a penalty is obviously an important factor, especially if we don't think it's bad. So the only way for us to think it's bad is to have a penalty attached to it, in most cases.
And a big enough penalty that it deters you.
Right.
Isn't there also some process that you've got to think about? So let me just show you a short clip here. Some of you may have seen this before. Okay, so how many of you have seen this before? How many of you have not seen this before? Tempts me to show it. So what this does, this walks through the U.S. process of turning an idea into a law. And it talks about how there's proposed to some congressman who then says that sounds like a good idea and writes a bill, and Congress votes on it, and then they pass it, they send it over to the president signs it into law, and it becomes binding. Now, Congress, or the Parliament, or whatever elected body you want to say, determines what the law is, and they also affix punishments, right? So is it not true that Congress could affix a punishment and say the penalty for jaywalking is now death? And that would influence your behavior, right? Because you would think, well, I don't want to be the guy who the person jumps out behind and kills, right? Okay, so you're all with me on that? Law, somehow there's a process to it that makes a difference to you, and it certainly has an impact on you, whether you agree with it or not, and that as this process determines what the law is and what the punishments are, that impacts how you understand that law, and even maybe your willingness to comply with that law, right? Does anybody disagree with that? All right, you're falling into my trap. That's good. So let me show you this clip. Okay, so what's going on here? I mean, I apologize for the subject matter, but what's going on here? You guys know this story, right? I mean, you've read it in the news. A bunch of dudes decided for whatever reason that they would, in this case for religious reasons, try and create their own country, community, whatever, and that within that country, community, they would take young women and basically treat them as sexual slaves. Now, how about that? Is that lawful? Is it okay for those dudes, whoever they are, to go through the same analysis you do with jaywalking and to decide, well, there might be some people who think this is unlawful, but I'm going to do a risk analysis and I'm going to think, is the reward I get from this kind of activity greater than the risk of something bad happening to me as a result? Is that an okay way for those dudes to approach that problem? Let me give you another example. Okay, what about that guy? Now, these are both the same subject matter, but I could have put up clips about using the Syrians using mustard gas, right, to gas their opponents. I could have put up arms sales. I could have put up human trafficking. I could have put up all kinds of events that are happening around the world. And I just want you to think, is your approach to law that we talked about earlier, is it okay for these guys? Can they just do a risk analysis and say, well, if the penalty is not going to be worse than the reward, I'm all right to treat that rule that way?
When I think about the laws, I tend to think about like the reason behind the law, like why is this law in effect? So for like driving on the right side of the road, when it's 1 o'clock in the morning and I'm driving on the I-15, it's foggy and there's no cars around, I like to drive right in the middle, even though it's against the law, because I think, well, what's the purpose? It's to prevent me from swerving over and hitting someone while they're in their lane. Except I'm thinking at 1 in the morning, I'm protecting my family and I'm driving here. And so it's more than just risk analysis, risk reward. I think it's also using discretionary analysis of the situation and determining, okay, there are times when the law doesn't really apply. I feel like in terms of the reasoning behind the law, you know, there's no reason for it in place at that particular moment. Other factors might trump that.
Okay, so for you, the factor that might trump it is the safety of your family in that specific instance. What about this second guy I showed you, where for him, the trumping factor is that his religious belief, his religious conviction, allows him to sell young girls in the marketplace knowing that they'll be raped, etc. Is that all right?
No.
Why?
Society said it's not okay.
Doesn't society equally...
It's endangering other people. Like the purpose behind that law is to prevent harm to other people. Right? The purpose behind staying in your lane is to prevent harm to other people. You know, if there's no one around, there's no one in the morning, seeking approaching vehicles through your life and stuff like that, you still have those preventive measures in place.
All right, I'm going to come back to that. Yes, Carol.
To me, what that sounds like is that the ends always just means. And if that was our approach to our law, our society, I think would be different.
You mean what Adam says, the ends just meant?
And I think as a society, we would all agree that that is not true.
Your response?
I don't think that because the means, that purpose, the purpose is to of law is to protect society as a whole. So I think
So the laws are meant to do that. So if the laws in place to not go towards that goal as a society, then what's the purpose of the law?
Okay, well, so society, you're talking about society. Who is the society that governs what that guy is doing?
He's in Nigeria, you said?
Yeah, is it the Nigerian society? Is it his religious community? Is it Africa? Is it the world? And so I've now shown you two fairly similar incidents, one happening in Syria and Iraq, and one happening in Nigeria. Who is the society that determines what is and what isn't okay?
Well, it's the radical branch of the religion. It's you can say the society is ISIS or similar types of radical Islam. And what you're asking is, well, does that make it okay? Well, in their realm, as weird as it sounds, like in their realm as their justification, although it's not moral, clearly they think it's okay.
Yeah, I bet if you put this guy and the sheikh who broke into the building where the girls were and took, and raped the 14-year-old, if you put both of them on a lie detector test and said, do you think what you're doing is a violation of law? I bet both of them would say no, right? Because they accept a law that's different than the law that you and I accept. So that puts us in a bit of a puzzle, doesn't it? Because is law, and particularly, like I say, we all know there are tons of things going on all around the world, right, where this horrible kind of stuff is happening. Does that mean that law is pretty fungible? Does that mean that where do we get these overarching laws that are going to govern what all of these people do? That are going to tell that guy who's the leader of Boko Haram, even though you think it's right, it's not. It's going to tell that sheikh in northern Syria, even though you think it's right, it's not. How are we going to do this? We can't. How are we going to do this? How would we do this in the U.S.? How would we do this in the U.S.?
From what I understand, there would be like a case where someone would bring it to court, and they'd probably get a jury, and if they didn't like the decision, they'd take it to an appellate court, and then they would take it to the Supreme Court, maybe. And
So they would rely.
it'd be like common law,
You
right?
rely on
It would be
some kind of
statutory.
legal system that governs us in our space, right? And before you walked in, we showed the Schoolhouse Rock clip about I'm Just a Bill. You remember that one?
Yeah.
Okay, so there would have been some law, and then there'd be some court case and some adjudication, and there would be an answer. How do you do that with the dude in northern Syria? Or how do you do that with the dude in Nigeria? Do you call him in front of you? Do we send a bunch of special forces guys over there and grab that guy and haul him back into Utah District Court? How do we do it? What are the norms? Yeah.
I think you kind of need to create a Leviathan, something that can create a big deterrent effect for them.
What's your major?
International relations.
So you've read all about the Leviathan. All right. So you want to create a Leviathan, yeah?
Because obviously the law they have in place wherever they are is not a big deterrent effect because they believe that they see that law as weak. They see their own law as higher.
So you want to create some global Leviathan that's going to set up some kind of laws that govern the whole world?
Not what I'm saying, but maybe just a state in Africa. I'm not saying what entity, just something that can create a deterrent effect.
So these guys are operating in Nigeria. Is Nigerian law working?
I would say not very effective.
Doesn't appear to be.
The biggest difficulty is these guys are sovereign, right? So they're in like their own sovereign states or communities that really, the biggest thing is, I think it's going back to the penalty. You have to, that's why sanctions, that's why we have sanctions, is we don't drag, Iran, or we don't drag these countries and tell them, come to the U.S. and we'll put you in front of a court of law. You have to be able to somehow, whether economically or through arms, you have to penalize them so bad to the point that they stop. That was the approach of World War II. That was the approach of a lot of different things. And so I think that's what it is you have to hurt sovereigns to the point that they give up their sovereignty.
Okay, so you just said a whole bunch of stuff that I wanted to interrupt you about 10 different times. But I resisted your so, sovereignty. Let's start with that. Sovereignty. What do you mean by sovereignty?
It's where there's no ultimate power that's higher in terms of the world. So a sovereign is oftentimes a country where you have a nation and a state, and together they're the highest form of control or government or power in that region.
Okay, so this sovereign, when you said countries, right? So when we think of countries as sovereigns, we think of them as co-equal, right? So Mauritius is just as sovereign as the United States, right?
Right.
Okay, so they're co-equal, and they're co-powerful, right? Mauritius is just as powerful as the United States.
Well, no, not in practical terms, no.
Of course not.
No.
Right? Of course not. Mauritius isn't as powerful as the United States. But there's still this principle of sovereignty makes them equal. So does that mean when we're looking for some kind of legal system that is going to help Nigeria or maybe even undercut Nigeria or go in when Nigeria is ineffective and basically impact that guy who is leader of Boko Haram, we're going to somehow go in and do something to him. If we don't like how Nigeria is handling it, how do we solve that problem?
There has to be talks at a table, or there has to be, Nigeria has to be somewhat involved, or you use arms. I mean, if you don't want to talk, you use arms.
All right, so let's list some solutions. You actually have already talked about two. The first one was sanctions, you mentioned, and now you're talking, and you mentioned this before as well, but now you're talking arms, which by arms I think you mean weapons, right? You mean the use of force, right? Okay, so you see some tension here. How do you regulate that tension? If what you're saying to me is that sovereignty is like the top dog, when people are sovereign, that means they're truly sovereign. People can't change, they can't enforce. Like, you don't want Mauritius coming to the United States and saying, I want you to do this. You want the United States to say, well, you can't tell me what to do, you can only tell yourself what to do, right? All right, then how are you going to establish a system where somebody can go into this co-equal sovereigns area and enforce some norm?
I mean, I think they've tried before. That's what the UN is about, right? So you have something where they all buy in. That's kind of the Leviathan, actually. Is like the whole point of Leviathan is that if everyone buys in and freely gives up some of their power, then they can create something that can govern them. So everyone has to buy into something, giving up a little piece of their sovereignty. So that's one way to be able to do it.
So if you're looking for a system, this system is going to have to be consensual.
Yeah, anyone who says, I don't agree with the system can't be governed by it, right?
Well, that's the question, right? So what happens if, let's just say that everybody else in the world doesn't want North Korea to have nuclear weapons, but North Korea wants nuclear weapons. So they don't consent to this regime. Does that mean it's okay? They don't have to?
I mean, okay morally or okay pragmatically? Because
Okay legally.
oh yeah, sure.
So North Korea can opt out.
Yeah.
Nigeria can opt out. Syria can opt out. Well, then now we're right back where we were, right? So Nigeria's opted out. This guy from Boko Haram is welcome to capture these schoolgirls and sell them into sexual slavery, and that's okay. And the sheikh in northern Syria is welcome to steal the Yazidis and take them back to wherever he wants to take them and use them as sexual slaves. That's all right, as a matter of law.
I mean, I don't know what you mean by all right, right? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, well, I guess what I'm saying is if the system is based on consent, then there's no systemic solution to that problem because they're opting out.
What's your name?
I'm Jason.
Jason. Well, I suppose
JC.
what JC was getting at with sovereignty is not that they're like part of a nation, but that they're like a group that can move between nations and is sovereign from any law. Like Al-Qaeda, right, can be in Pakistan, Afghanistan, and they move around, and they're technically not following the laws of any of those countries.
So a transnational organization
Yeah.
isn't necessarily subject to this sovereignty paradigm. Particularly if what we're saying
Right.
sovereigns really is are nations, right?
Yeah. And so I feel like there has to be some sort of like consensus among the sovereign nations that can be like, we don't like this going on, and so we can take care of this all together in joint forces.
So what's your name?
Jackie.
Right, so Jackie, if you're gonna, I gave JC, I proposed to him the issue that we can't, we're gonna try and solve this problem, but these guys might opt out. What I think you're saying now is that, well, transnational organizations like IS, like Boko Haram, if they try to opt out, then the community of nations who are acting consensually in the system may say, you can't opt out, and we're gonna keep you from opting out, we're gonna lower the hammer.
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
Mm-hmm.
And then, if they decide to lower the hammer, they can come to some of these solutions that JC's already proposed. They can use sanctions, they can use arms and invade, right? All right,
That's
so,
kind of like how you get recognized as a nation, right? Is you agree to this system, and so we recognize you as a nation, and you agree to like a set of values, like the Human Rights Declaration and things like that.
okay, so we as a system of consensual nations have decided that there are certain human rights that can't be violated, like the right to life. You can't arbitrarily have your life taken away from you. And the system has agreed to that. And what does the system do? So I got these solutions. I mean, I hear what you're saying is these solutions will work with a transnational actor. But what do you do with JC's problem? What happens when it's a sovereign that opts out and says, look, that arbitrary right to life thing is okay, but I'm not a big fan, and I got these dudes in my country I don't like, I just want to kill them. Then how does the system respond to that? Let me give you a clip. Let's just say this happens. Okay, so we have a sovereign nation, Ukraine. You guys all know this story, right? We have the sovereign nation of Ukraine that has an autonomous republic of Crimea, but it's still part of their sovereign nation. And another sovereign, Russia, loads up a bunch of dudes and sends them across the border because they don't like the way that Ukraine is treating people who are ethnically tied to Russia. So we have two now competing sovereigns, of course co-equal, right? And they've got these competing interests. Russia says, I have Russians who have human rights, and they're not being treated well. And Ukraine says, I have sovereign borders, and you're coming across them. How are you going to resolve that problem?
I don't think it's hard to say. It's hard to put too much faith in organizations like the UN, where the majority will decide who's more equal.
More equal. What does that mean?
It's like who we can't.
That sounds like an oxymoron, doesn't it?
We
More
can't
equal?
really think that everyone's co-equal. That's total anarchy. There's no protection for anyone really. So some values need to be more equal, is what I'm saying. Or they need to be, more highly valued than others.
I got you. I know how to resolve this. Here, I got another one for you. No, don't tell me they don't have it. Lord. All right, I'll just have to tell you. You remember in episode 1 of Star Wars, Darth Sidious is appearing as a hologram to that guy. And he says, go ahead and invade. And the Federation guy says, is that legal? And what does Darth Sidious say? When you start aficionados, what does he say? I will make it legal, right? So what you're saying is that if you're more equal, if you're in this system and you're more equal, in other words, if you're more powerful, if you're the United States, then you can just impose your will. Or if you're Russia, Russia's stronger than Ukraine in an objective sense. They can just impose their will. And how does the system do it? Dylan, as the system, is that okay in the system? Is that okay in the United States system? let's just say, tell me your name. Sorry? Claire, tell me your name. Austin. All right, so Claire went and got 2 pieces of pizza. Austin wanted one. Austin is stronger than Claire, and I know that's probably debatable. But we'll assume that Austin is stronger than Claire. And Austin says, Claire, I want your pizza. And he takes it. Or let's just say Claire's house is next to Austin's. And Austin likes Claire's house better. And so he comes over one day and knocks on the door with his gun and says, Claire, I like your house better. I'm moving in. Do we accept that as even a potentiality in the U.S. system of law? Do we accept that then? Should we accept that as a potentiality in the international system of law? Can Russia just go into Crimea and say, you know, I kind of feel like I want to take over Crimea. It's got this nice warm water port.
The underlying problem is law only works in a group where everybody agrees to it. So in the U.S., of course, everybody is a citizen.
Wait. Law only works in a group when everybody agrees to it. Didn't you admit earlier today to violating any number of traffic laws?
I did, and if I'd been caught, then I would have paid the penalty.
But the law is still binding whether or not you agree with it. Even it's still binding whether or not you abide by it, isn't it?
Exactly.
Does the fact that you violate the law mean it's no longer a law? So in international, go ahead.
I think that the problem on the international scale is now you don't have a larger group to subscribe to. The only thing is, if a crime becomes so egregious, like in Nigeria, where they're saying this is fine, or you look at any number of genocides where the country says it's fine, the only thing is if it becomes so egregious that it's a crime against humanity. You have this concept of just the human population, that it's a crime against everybody concerned in the world. And that's when you kind of get this consensus together where you persuade enough people that it's a problem, that they feel justified in sanctions or arms or invasions, or convincing a minority and help them overthrow the majority, put people on trial in international courts.
So would you classify either of these situations that I put up for you a crime against humanity? The raping of 14-year-old girls in northern Iraq and Syria, the capture and selling into sexual slavery of schoolgirls in Nigeria, and the invasion of a sovereign country by another country's army. Are any of those crimes against humanity to you?
Yes,
All three are.
it could also depend on the country. Like, Russia's not looking at the crime against humanity because they're looking at it from the Russians' point of view. Right. You have to get this.
And we've already established the Sheikh and Boko Haram don't think what they're doing are crimes against humanity, right?
It has to be a majority until you're comfortable enough that you feel like you have enough countries beside you that you feel comfortable taking action that you won't have negative repercussions.
So then what the U.S. should do is they should say, all right, everybody, we're circulating this video that shows these horrible things that Boko Haram is doing, and afterwards we'd like you to vote whether you think that's a crime against humanity or not. And if we get a majority of folks, then that means that we can invade Nigeria. Or, I mean, you know, sanctions, arms. With Boko Haram, it's probably going to take an invasion, given who they are. Is that... So let me take one more step. So in other words, if after 9/11, the United States opted to take people to Guantanamo and do things that some people thought were torture, then if Germany, for example, took a poll around the world, and the majority of countries in the world said torture is bad, it's out of the system, it's not right, then they would have the right to invade the U.S. to prevent us from doing that in Guantanamo.
It's not as cut and dry as it would be like in Hero. You have a jury. You're playing on a stage where everybody was a member of the jury. You have to be constantly convincing the other players on the stage, the other countries, that what you're doing is just and what you're doing is legal. Because, as I understand, it doesn't seem like there's very broad international legal laws like the Human Rights Convention, but you really have to convince other people that what you're doing is right, which makes it a little tricky.
Convince people what you're doing is right. I got to show you this one. Okay, this is President Obama. You'll recognize him. He's talking about military actions in Libya. Listen to what he says. Do you believe that? But when our interests and values are at stake, we have a responsibility to act. Jason?
I think that's the key of international politics and all that. And because the thing about the House is you have police who can say that was wrong and they can enforce it. But if Russia wants to take over Ukraine's house, there is no world police. I mean, so what is right doesn't mean what is practical or what happens. And so in the United States,
What does it mean? Does it mean...
it means it's allowed because who's going to stop them? And
You're back to my Darth Sidious example.
Exactly.
We'll make it legal, right?
Exactly. And so in this situation, every single sovereign nation thinks like this. But not every single one can do this like the United States. So it all goes back to interests and ideals. Every country, Boko Haram have their own interests and ideals, and to the extent that they can carry out those interests and ideals, it's okay on the world stage until someone stops them. And that's with the United States. The only difference in the United States is most people feel like the ideals of the United States are more compatible and more palatable than Boko Haram and ISIS. But at the end of the day, every single group, to the extent that they can, pursue their own interests and ideals, and they defend them. And that's basically how international relations, as far as I see, is how it is until someone can stop them, it's okay, quote unquote, right? Like in quotations.
So if we come back to this system, and we say it's a consensual system, which it must be amongst sovereigns, right? It has to be consensual. For this system to actually have any sway based on what you're saying, then it has to be based on combined ideals and interests, mutual ideals and interests. So it wouldn't surprise you if I told you that in the wake of World War II, the nations of the world got together and signed a treaty, a charter, where they said that the use of force between nations was illegal except in self-defense. And that they said we're doing this as a matter of consent, and it's in our mutual interest to stop all this fighting, this conflagration that is World War. And so we're going to say, as a matter of law, that we in this consensual system, we will abstain from, in fact, we'll say it's prohibited to use force against another except in self-defense, right? That's exactly what happened. You all know that, right? I mean, this is the UN Charter. That's what the UN Charter says. Now, you saw, though, Putin, right, and Crimea, Russia, this was post-charter, so how do you explain that? Is he just ignoring the law? Is he balancing differing laws? How do you explain that in this consensual system? And does it matter? Or is it just might makes right?
I think from all of my studies of the UN and what it can do, I feel like nothing is binding enough to really hurt someone when they disobey the charter or the treaty. And so I feel like for a country like Russia who's like, we want to go invade and get Crimea, the detriment isn't big enough to stop them from doing that.
All right, so you're going to be in the United States Army at some point. You're in ROTC right now on a scholarship. You're excited to join the military and to represent the United States abroad. If the U.S. decides to do something that's outside this consensual norm, right? Let's say we want to invade Iraq. Do you think that it ought to be a lawful order for you to go with the military to Iraq to do this thing that's outside the consensual system, but it's within our interests and what we think is important?
Well, I think that it seems like a case-by-case scenario. It all depends on the person's values if we get into something that's specific. And so when you're talking about the individual member of the military, if they're okay with things like that, then we go back to that moral law we were talking about.
So as an individual, you might reserve that decision, but as a military, generally, you would say you have to do what your leaders tell you. So this is what international law is all about. This is the point I'm trying to make, that I just labored you with in the past 4 minutes. This is what international law is all about. International law is an attempt to take this consensual, co-equal system and devise not only rules that people will abide by, but also penalties if people don't. And so we're not going to say, we're not going to kill you because you jaywalk. But we're going to recognize that you go through a risk analysis when you consider the law. That some people will go 20 over, some people will only go 5. And we're going to think, what is going to be the aberration in the system, and how are we going to, through law and enforcement, which is also going to be a lawful means, control it. And so that's what public international law is all about. When you come to my class 2 years from now in the first semester of your second year of law school, and we talk about public international law, I'm going to try and convince you that the world has established this consensual system that is governed by international law. And when I say law, I mean law, not international might makes right, or international power politics, or international anything else. I'm going to call it international law, and I'm going to say it's law because it's what states do in this consensual, sovereign system. And I'm going to try and convince you that this international law is actually the fabric that keeps the peace to the extent that we have peace in this world, that keeps the peace that we have now, and that it ought not to be might makes right, but that the U.S. ought not to be able to do whatever they want just because they're the strongest and biggest nation in the world, and that Russia ought not to be able to roll into Ukraine just because they can't do it themselves, and that North Korea ought not to be able to produce nuclear weapons just because no one's brave enough to take on China. That's what international is about. So when I see you in a couple of years, that's what we'll talk about. Any questions?
All right, thank you. Again, we want to thank you for coming. For those of you who are not currently law students but are thinking about law school, we'd like to make sure that you're aware that you can come and attend first-year classes on our website for BYU Law. There's under admissions, you can submit a request to attend one of the first-year classes and get a little more feel for what it's like. We have tours of the law school. We will be continuing to advertise the remainder of our World of Law series, and we have lots of different events during the semester and the school year. So we hope that you signed up as you came in, those of you that are thinking about law school. I'm Dean Gayla Sorensen, Dean of Admissions for the law school, Director Marie Colbeth, who's the Director of Admissions. We are happy to meet with you anytime and would love to get to know you and help you as you go through the decision-making process. So thank you again, and we hope to see you around the law school again soon.